Moving on now, international relations and security analyst Mark Sliboda is joining us live from Moscow. Thank you so much for joining us.
Having me.
What can you tell us about the situation on ground in Moscow? How do you assess President Putin's military operation in Ukraine? What is the mood like currently on ground?
Okay, well, so the Russian president launched a military intervention in Ukraine to protect the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, which were still under assault from the forces of the U.S.-backed putsch regime in Kiev. The mood on the ground here in Moscow, well, life is going on pretty much as normal. I think there's a great deal of support for Russian troops and a great deal of both glad tidings and concern. A lot of people have family here in eastern Ukraine, a lot of which has been under assault for the last 8 years. And I think that they're breathing a sigh of relief that the military forces that were shelling the cities in eastern Ukraine are being pushed back.
All right. Now, we know the West has time again reiterated support and solidarity with the Ukraine. However, sanctions and diplomacy, as you know, have failed to yield any results. What are the next steps that we can expect from the United States and the Western allies?
I expect a lot of really hypocritical, heated rhetoric. I mean, particularly coming from the United States that is still militarily occupying East Syria and Iraq against the wishes of that country's own parliament. But I think that you will see movements, U.S. and other NATO country military forces to the eastern borders of NATO, where they will sit there and glare across the border and enjoy a European vacation. I think you will see a very extensive round of further U.S. sanctions. Russia has already endured some over 100 packages of U.S. and European sanctions over the last few years. I don't think these sanctions will have any real traumatic effect on the Russian economy. You know, the U.S.'s economic warfare has had only limited damage for so many years at this point. Russia, unfortunately for the United States and Europe, provides so many valuable commodities, energy, wheat, you know, that are so crucial not only to Europe but to global markets, that anything that would seriously affect the Russian economy would probably bring the entire world's economy down with it.
Right. Now, Ukraine's air defenses, as per reports, are under threat, and there have been multiple reports of explosions. Some 7 casualties have been reported so far. This after Russia claimed that the citizens of Ukraine were not under threat. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, the Russian government's concern is not the people of Ukraine. They're not at war with the people of Ukraine. They're at war with the U.S.-backed regime that seized power in Kiev in 2014 and has continued a military campaign of subjugation against its own people in the East for the last 8 years. That said, this will be an extensive military campaign, in the words of the Russian president, to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And there will be collateral damage, as in any major military conducting a campaign of this size. There will unfortunately be collateral damage, but right as of this moment, the Russian military is using precision strikes. Actually, the words I have is that the Ukrainian, the Kiev regime's air defense have been completely destroyed and neutralized at this point, and Russia has air superiority over the country. They're making targeted caliber cruise missiles, ballistic missile, and drone strikes against the Kiev regime's command and control, air defense, and means to strike back their own antiquated missile units and air forces at this point.
All right, but also there are questions about Russia's objectives here. What can we expect going forward? What do you think are the next steps?
Well, I think that this campaign will not be limited simply to, kind of strikes against the Kiev regime's military forces. I think that we're already seeing reports of Russian and Donetsk and Lugansk and even Belarusian military forces moving around such cities in eastern Ukraine as Kherson, Mariupol, and there are reports of Russian and Belarusian forces to lay down their arms and stop supporting the regime that seized power in Kiev in 2014, basically off.
A few minutes ago, what can you tell us of the broader implications of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be large amounts of people moving around, refugees. I mean, from just 2014 to 2015, when the Kiev regime began its military campaign in East Ukraine, there were some up to 2 million Ukrainians who fled for safety into Russia. And in the last few days, with the increase in Kiev regime artillery shelling of Donetsk and Lugansk republics in East Ukraine, you have also seen at least 100,000 Ukrainians flee further into Russia before Russia finally took some action to end that threat to their lives there. But likewise, you will see large amounts of people in the rest of Ukraine leaving areas with high military concentrations, leaving cities, and people that supported this regime in Kiev. You will see large numbers of them flee either to West Ukraine or beyond to Poland, Romania, possibly Hungary. You will see influx of people fleeing the conflict zone.
Right. Also circling back to a point made earlier now, the United States has promised further consequences. Could you just break that down for us?
Yeah, the U.S. has long been conducting an economic war against Russia. I mean, they've sanctioned their own allies and countries just for doing war with Russia. That will continue. In fact, even India came under threat of sanctions simply for buying Russian air defense systems, although that has largely been quieted and put aside so that the U.S. didn't strain relations further with India. But I think you'll see moves to try to isolate Russian banks. There will not, from transacting in the dollar, major Russian banks. I don't think that you will see Russia cut off from SWIFT. The Europeans have kind of vetoed that idea because they would then have no ability to pay for their own energy, which they will still need from Russia. Right. But I think that one of the U.S.'s big plans is to try to cut Russia off from the global semiconductor market. And they've been pushing some of their allies in Asia towards that goal.
Right. Also, just for more clarity on this, you made a point earlier. You said that sanctions by the West do not seem to have a very tragic impact on Russia. Now, what compels you to say that?
Well, I mean, the U.S.'s own reports, the U.S. Treasury reports, for several years now have reported economic damage of about 1% to the Russian GDP. And in fact, Russian sanctions on Russia counter-sanctions have actually resulted in the dramatic growth of several sectors of the Russian economy, particularly the agricultural and manufacturing industries, when Russia was forced for import substitution and to provide, their own products. That actually led to a huge growth in the Russian agricultural sector. When it comes down to it, the U.S. actually has very little economic leverage with Russia. It actually imports far more from Russia. There's a very high trade imbalance in Russia's favor. They import far more from Russia than Russia buys from the United States, including things that they can't easily source elsewhere without dramatic effects on their own economy, like oil. Russia is the second largest source of imported oil to the United States after Canada. And already we are seeing oil prices rise over $100 a barrel. Right. Gas prices are also sky high. And both of those actually benefit the Russian government, the Russian economy. So a lot of this economic damage will be offset by increases in the price of commodities that Russia sells to the world.
All right. And also, how do you see this escalation impacting international order? And what can we expect in the hours, days to come?
Yeah, I think we've long been seeing a push as U.S. unipolar moment fades and the U.S. fights to maintain its global hegemony against a upsurge of a multipolar world, resisting their hegemony and attempts at primacy around the world. That counter reaction is actually pushing the world, instead of in a multipolar direction, towards a bipolar direction. And we're seeing kind of a new Cold War emerge with the West solidifying on one side, with Russia, China, Iran, and others on the other, and kind of a new block of neutral countries forming as well. So I think this is going to have very dramatic effects on the international order, but it's only going to be accelerating trends that were already in development.
All right. Also, just before we wrap up, I want to ask you one last question. How do you assess the role of the international community? We've spoken about the United States, but just other allies, how do you assess their role in this crisis?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the international community, that's a favorite buzzword of the United States, referring mostly to the West, their own close allies. But the world is not the West. The world is a very large community, and not all of them are as beholden to U.S. foreign policy as the U.S. would like it. Certainly, there's already been motions, from the world's largest population and economy, China, that are largely providing support to Russia and all this. And there are a host of other countries that have as well. In fact, the Pakistani prime minister just arrived in Moscow, and his comments upon landing and get off the plane were kind of giddy, that, wow, to be here during all this excitement. So however much the West might think they could isolate Russia, they can't speak for the world. They are not the international community. The international community is extremely varied, and a lot of them are very wary about the meddling that the U.S. has done in eastern Ukraine, particularly in Eastern Europe, particularly in Ukraine, that has set off this whole chain of events since 2014.
Right. All right, Mr. Mark Sleboda, thank you so much for joining us with all your inputs on this.